Only 27 seconds, that's how long it took for Jasmine Crockett to tear apart Donald Trump's plan to gut $2.1 billion in education funding on live national TV. With 52 million Americans watching, she slammed the red folder on the table and called him a coward who defunds children to feed billionaires. Trump froze, cameras kept rolling, and then came a scream no one was supposed to hear. What exactly was inside that folder that made the most powerful man in America lose control on live television? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Only 3 cameras, but over 52 million eyes. C-SPAN, CNN, MSNBC, their red record lights blinked like snipers in the dark, silent, precise, ready to capture blood. The national town hall had never seen this kind of tension. Not in a generation, not since Watergate. And tonight, the nation wasn't just watching a debate, it was watching a standoff. 2 chairs, 1 stage. On the left, President Donald J. Trump coiffed, defiant, smirking like a man who still owned every room he entered. On the right, Representative Jasmine Crockett, composed, razor-sharp, and burning with something deeper than rage, purpose. The moderator's voice was trembling beneath the makeup and professionalism. Tonight, we open the floor to one of the most controversial issues in America right now, the $2.1 billion cut to federal education funding initiated by Executive Order 1427, signed last month by President Trump. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Somewhere offstage, a producer made the sign of the cross. Jasmine's gaze locked on Trump's eyes. They told me not to fight him, she thought. That's how I knew I had to. He blinked first. No pleasantries, no introductions, no warm-up questions. The moderator turned cold steel. Mr. Trump, millions of students across 28 states have lost access to after-school programs, summer literacy grants, and basic lunch subsidies. Why cut the future of America's children? Trump leaned into the mic, lips curled. Because it's a waste, states know their kids. The federal government doesn't. We've spent too long coddling failing schools and woke teachers. It's time to clean house. A woman in the front row gasped, a man behind her hissed. Jasmine sat silent, eyes fixed, breath slow. Then she leaned forward, and in the stillest 3 seconds of the night, she slid a red folder across the table, slow, deliberate, theatrical. Cameras zoomed in. The folder was sealed. Marked Doge Internal Review. Restricted. What's that? Trump asked, visibly annoyed. You trying to make a scene? Jasmine didn't answer. Not yet. Her voice was low but lethal. Inside this folder are the names of 187 school districts, mostly in red states, that were promised education grants by your administration and then had them yanked without explanation. Trump chuckled. Oh please, another Democrat stunt. And inside, she interrupted, are signatures, emails from your own team falsifying the budgetary impact to justify the cuts. In Alabama, in West Virginia, in Mississippi. These aren't liberal strongholds, these are your people. Silence. Even the moderator didn't know what to say. A camera panned across the live audience. One woman's jaw was visibly trembling. Another man had covered his mouth with both hands. Trump leaned back, eyes narrowing. If you say my name one more time with that smug tone, you'll regret it. Jasmine turned to the camera. Say it again. I'll tattoo it on the cover of every textbook your cuts just deleted. The audience gasped. A CNN producer whispered, we just broke the internet. And in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't a debate. This was war. But what's inside that red folder? And why did Jasmine wait until now to open it? Stay with us, this story hasn't even started bleeding yet. The red folder sat like a live grenade between them, but Jasmine didn't need to open it yet. She had something sharper than paper. Her voice. Let's be crystal clear, she began, her tone calm, but loaded like a gun with the safety off. What you did wasn't policy, it was a political death sentence for rural children. Trump raised an eyebrow, the smugness creeping in like rot. He adjusted his tie, leaned back, and whispered into the mic, you done? She didn't blink, not even close. She pointed to the screens behind them as images flickered to life. School cafeterias emptied out, after-school centers shuttered, children holding handwritten signs that read, we want to learn. You pulled $2.1 billion from kids who barely had chalk. You defunded dreams, Mr. Trump, just to feed your tax cuts for yachts and condos. The crowd stirred. Tension rippled like heat off pavement. The moderator leaned forward but said nothing. He knew better now. This wasn't his show anymore. Trump chuckled and turned to her, voice dripping with contempt. You wouldn't know real education if it slapped you in the face. The room inhaled. Crockett didn't move, didn't flinch. Her response came like a blade slicing silk. And you wouldn't know poverty unless it sued you for child support and dragged your name through the dirt you pretend not to see. The audience gasped. Trump's smile vanished for a flicker, just a flicker, but it was there. Then she stood. In my district, she said, school nurses are volunteers. Teachers buy supplies out of pocket, and yet you come here, spewing nonsense about efficiency like it's a synonym for neglect. She turned to the cameras because she wasn't talking to him anymore. She was talking to America. You don't believe in states' rights. You believe in political convenience. You don't want local control. You want plausible deniability. You want to starve public schools until they collapse, and then sell them off to your buddies who run charter scams. Trump crossed his arms, biting his lip, visibly irritated now. You talk a big game, but your party's the one that let these schools rot. And yours, she fired back, took a match to the last plank in the floor. She walked slowly to the table, placed her palm on the red folder. This isn't about ideology, it's about receipts. The camera zoomed in on her hand. This folder doesn't just contain emails. It contains the betrayal of children to poor to afford your politics. It contains names, dates, districts, and when I open it, this whole damn room will forget what silence ever sounded like. Trump laughed nervously, glancing toward his aide offstage. Is she allowed to have that? Is this legal? Jasmine didn't even look at him. She leaned into the microphone, eyes locked on the American people, and said with venom-laced calm, if you're so confident in your cuts, Mr. Trump, why does this folder scare you more than the truth? And for a full 5 seconds, the president said nothing. Not one word. And in those 5 seconds, the whole country knew. He just lost the room. The screen behind them flickered to life. No graphics, no statistics, just the live feed of a woman sitting stiffly in a faded armchair, an American flag pinned to her lapel, and a classroom whiteboard barely visible behind her. If you're so confident in your cuts, Mr. Trump, why does this folder scare you more than the truth? And for a full 5 seconds, the president said nothing. Not one word. And in those 5 seconds, the whole country knew. He just lost the room. The screen behind them flickered to life. No graphics, no statistics, just the live feed of a woman sitting stiffly in a faded armchair, an American flag pinned to her lapel, and a classroom whiteboard barely visible behind her. Joining us via satellite, the moderator announced, is Mrs. Lainey Carter, a 5th grade teacher and single mother from Butler County, Alabama. She has something to say. Jasmine folded her hands. Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, clearly annoyed by the interruption. The lights dimmed slightly as the room fell silent. Lainey's voice cracked before it even found the mic. My school lost summer funding 2 weeks ago. Her southern drawl was thick, but there was no mistaking the steel behind her words. No warning, no transition plan, just a memo that said, terminated. She held up a letter with the Department of Education seal crumpled at the edges from being handled too many times. Her eyes stayed on the camera, but her hands trembled. My son, Dylan, was supposed to be in that program. It was his only chance at catching up after his dyslexia diagnosis. Without it, he just sits at home now, stares out the window. Says he's too dumb to try anymore. The crowd drew a collective breath. Someone in the front row whispered, oh my God. Jasmine's fingers curled into a fist beneath the desk. Her voice, barely audible to the mic, cut through the silence like a curse. You bastard, you knew. Trump squirmed in his seat but said nothing. The camera cut briefly to him, jaw tight, nostrils flaring, then back to Lainey. She wasn't finished. I teach in the same building where I learned my ABCs. We've had the same broken copy machine for 7 years. I use duct tape to hold classroom tables together. And when you cut our funding, you didn't just steal pencils, you stole futures, my kid's future. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and held up a handmade drawing stick figures and a bright red crayon sun. He drew this the day before the program shut down. He thought it meant he was finally going to get smart school. Now, he keeps asking if the president canceled his brain. The room went still. Jasmine closed her eyes, just for a moment, long enough to keep from crying, not long enough to forget the fury. Then she stood, slowly, quietly, and with eyes that could slice through concrete, she turned to Trump. "You sit there," she said, voice low but pulsing with rage, "in your designer suit, behind your layers of legal teams and tax shelters, and you still have the audacity to say this was about efficiency." Trump tried to speak, but Jasmine raised her hand not to silence him, but to let the silence speak louder. She reached for the red folder once more, held it in both hands, let the tension stretch like a bowstring on the edge of snapping, then stared straight into the camera. "America just heard one mother. That this folder holds 187. You think the last 3 minutes hurt, you hadn't heard pain yet. And what happens if she opens that folder, right now? Live, stay with us. This isn't just policy, it's a reckoning." The lights dimmed again, but this time it wasn't for drama, it was for revelation. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak, not yet. She simply tapped the screen behind her with the side of a pen, and the image exploded to life, a digital heat map of the United States. But it wasn't temperature, it was damage. The map was bleeding red. Deep crimson patches stretched across Mississippi, Alabama, West Virginia, Kentucky, parts of rural Texas, Georgia, even Oklahoma. Each pulse of color represented a district where federal education funds had been cut, frozen, or redirected in the past 6 months. The audience murmured. Phones were raised. Reporters began typing furiously. Jasmine finally spoke clear, sharp, devastating. "These are not liberal strongholds. These are not coastal elites. These are the towns you call real America, Mr. Trump, and you gutted them like they were expendable." Trump let out a loud, derisive scoff. "That's fake. Total junk. Nobody believes that crap but you and your MSNBC scriptwriters." Jasmine didn't even look at him. She turned to the crowd and pointed. "District 1 for B, Jackson County, West Virginia, $317,000 cut from literacy programs. Senator Hawley's office called me personally about it." Gasps. She clicked again. "District 7A, Etowah, Alabama, summer STEM camp defunded. Senator Tuberville's chief of staff emailed my office 4 times in 1 week." Another click. District 1-2F, rural Missouri, Title I lunch A, erased overnight. Senator Vance begged for discretion when he asked me to reverse it." Trump's face flushed, visibly rattled. "She's lying. This is all theater. I never." "You want to talk theater?" she snapped, turning her full body toward him now. "You've been performing for 6 years, tweeting insults while kids go hungry. You build walls, not classrooms. You fund private jets, not public schools. And now you're mad your own party is whispering to me for help." The camera panned across the audience. Some mouths hung open, others shook their heads in disbelief. Jasmine walked up to the screen, placed her hand over the darkest patch in Mississippi. "This is a school district where 78% of the students live below the poverty line. Your cuts took away their library, their buses, their speech therapist. You erased their safety net and called it freedom." Trump stood halfway from his chair, finger jabbing the air. "I gave those states choice. I gave them control. You'd rather have government handouts than innovation." She turned to him slowly, like drawing a blade from its sheath. "No. I'd rather have facts than fantasies. I'd rather have a broken school than a broken spine pretending you care." A low murmur built in the crowd. CNN cut to a split screen. Hashtags exploded. Reporters whispered, "She just named them. She just burned them." The screen behind Jasmine froze on one final district, her own, Dallas. "And you tried to erase mine too." She turned to the audience. "If this is what he does to his allies, what do you think he's doing to your children? And if she's holding back more names, what happens when she decides to burn the list down completely?" The heat map still glowed behind her like a battlefield soaked in silent screams. Jasmine didn't need graphics anymore. What came next wasn't data, it was something you couldn't chart. Something you felt in your throat. She pulled out a single piece of paper. It was creased, worn, the ink slightly smudged. She held it with both hands, her fingers steady, her voice razor sharp. "This," she said, "is a letter I received last week. It's from a janitor. Not from New York, not from LA, from a town called Laurel, Mississippi. A place that voted for you by 73%, Mr. Trump." Trump rolled his eyes, shifted in his chair, but didn't speak. Jasmine looked down and began to read. Dear Congresswoman Crockett, I work at Jefferson Elementary. Been there 19 years. I'm not woke, I'm just broke. My daughter was supposed to go to that new summer reading program. She was excited because she said, maybe now she wouldn't feel dumb in class anymore. But the program got cut. They told us it was realigning federal priorities. I don't know what that means. I just know my little girl cried herself to sleep. She looked up. And the silence in the room could have sliced marble. Trump sat motionless. Even the moderator didn't shift. The audience had gone from passive observers to something else, something electric, raw, waiting. Jasmine stepped forward. One pace, her voice lowering into something more dangerous than anger. Clarity. You lied to these people. You told them the cuts were for urban cities. You sold them a fantasy that the money was going to illegals, to woke schools, to coastal elites, but it wasn't. You slashed the rope while they were still climbing it. She pointed to the screen behind her, to a red patch in Kansas. They lost their bus routes, another patch in North Carolina. They lost their art teacher, another one in Tennessee. They lost their speech pathologist. She paused. Let it sink. You didn't just betray Democrats, you betrayed your own base. And worst of all, you made them believe it was someone else's fault. Trump snorted, finally breaking the tension. Oh, give me a break, another sob story. Maybe if her daughter read less liberal books and more Bibles, she wouldn't need help. The room didn't laugh. Not a single person moved. Then Jasmine leaned into the mic, eyes sharp enough to cut bone. You want to defund everything but your ego. And guess what? Your ego doesn't feed kids. It doesn't teach phonics. It doesn't patch leaking ceilings or pay for chalk. Your ego is the only public good left untouched by your greed. The audience erupted. Even Fox News cut to commercial. Jasmine held the letter up one last time. This isn't a sob story. This is your voter. And your silence already told her everything she needs to know. So if rural America was never the target, why are they the ones still bleeding? Trump slammed his hand down on the desk, not hard, but just loud enough to break the spell Jasmine had been weaving for the past 10 minutes. Education should belong to the states. He barked. That's what real freedom looks like. Not this bloated federal babysitting you liberals love so much. A few polite claps came from one corner of the crowd. The rest stared in stunned silence, waiting, dreading what would come next. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She stood still, staring at the man across from her like she had studied him in every American tragedy textbook. She slowly turned her head to the camera. You don't want to return power to the states, she said, voice low and lethal. You want to return to Jim Crow. You want to redraw maps, not to decentralize but to disappear people, and you thought no one would notice. The room seized with tension. Trump shot back. That's offensive. That's race-baiting garbage. Jasmine took a single step forward and tapped the heat map still glowing behind her. Then explain this. Why are the districts hit hardest by your cuts the same ones that were Redland 60 years ago? A spotlight highlighted the blood red zones across the South, former plantation counties, forgotten coal towns, hollowed-out reservations. Explain, she continued, why your administration targeted Title I schools with over 80% minority enrollment. While shielding private institutions with less than 5%, Trump was silent, lips twitching. The moderator tried to step in. Let's remember to keep this civil. No, Jasmine cut in sharply. Let's remember to keep this honest. Civility without truth is just well-mannered cruelty. Gasps, one camera tilted slightly, shaking from the operator's hands. She pointed again at the map. He didn't just pull funding. He rewrote the geography of who deserves opportunity. He carved up education the same way politicians carved up voting districts. This isn't about states' rights, it's about state-sanctioned regression. Trump laughed, but it sounded hollow. I didn't redraw any damn lines. Jasmine turned her body full toward him. No, you just handed the scissors to people who already had the map drawn in blood. Silence, the kind that turns into airless gravity. She stepped to the edge of the platform, never taking her eyes off the crowd. Education is supposed to be a ladder, but under you, it became a trapdoor, and the ones falling through it all wear the same faces, speak the same languages, live in the same zip codes that your donors never drive through. Trump shifted in his chair. Crockett took the red folder again, raised it slightly above her shoulder. I've got more than maps. I've got memos. I've got timestamps. I've got names of children who stopped going to school because your map didn't see them as worth funding. She paused, let the rage settle, let it ferment. Then she leaned into the mic with a voice that felt like history had a blade to its throat. Was this map drawn to help America, ... or was it redrawn with lies? Stay with us because the truth isn't on paper anymore. It's about to bleed through it. As the studio lights flickered overhead, something shifted behind Jasmine's eyes. Not defeat, not distraction, a memory, the kind you don't summon, it ambushes you. The map behind her blurred, replaced not by graphics, but by hallway tiles scuffed by poverty. ... She didn't need to look at the crowd. She wasn't talking to them anymore. She was speaking to ghosts. I didn't grow up in theory. I grew up in Oak Cliff, Texas, where the heater broke in January and the vending machine worked better than the lunch line. Her voice was quieter now, not weaker, sharper, realer, the kind of tone that made producers freeze in their headsets. The kind of silence no sound technician dared cut. We had textbooks missing chapters. I learned algebra on pages torn from 2 different editions, one with mold, one with graffiti. We weren't poor because we failed. We failed because someone rich had decided we weren't worth succeeding. The screen flashed images from the early 90s, a rundown elementary school with boarded windows, cracked basketball courts, broken flagpoles flying torn stars. My mom worked 3 jobs, cleaned houses during the day, checked groceries at night, and fried chicken in between. Still found time to check my homework by flashlight because the power got cut off more than the school announcements did. Jasmine paused, swallowed hard, then took a breath as if drawing strength from the very concrete she was raised on. I remember sitting in a classroom where the ceiling leaked every time it rained. We didn't call it a hazard, we called it the quietest moment in math class. A soft, uncomfortable chuckle rippled through the crowd, but Jasmine didn't smile. We weren't statistics, we were kids with futures. We just didn't know anyone had already auctioned them off behind closed doors. Trump looked away, jaw clenched, cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch in his expression. I still remember the day he asked for a new science lab. They gave us 1 microscope and a used periodic table. Half the elements were missing, so were half the kids by senior year. Jasmine reached for her mic and held it like a torch, her tone sharpening again, like steel scraping against scar tissue. That's why I don't care if he calls me low IQ, because I'm not here because of his version of merit, I'm here in spite of it. I built this voice from the cracks they left in our foundation. I sharpened my arguments on the back of eviction notices. I passed the bar exam with the lights off. The audience was dead silent, but their stillness roared. She stepped forward, closer to the edge of the platform. So don't talk to me about chosen states' rights unless you've been a child with a genius mind and a hollow lunch tray. Don't tell me about freedom when your policies chain kids to zip codes like their prison numbers. She looked at the camera like it owed her a debt. Because if this man gets to rewrite what opportunity means in America, then the little girl I used to be will disappear from the story entirely, and I refuse to let her die quietly. But what if the system was never broken, just built to break certain kids first? Trump leaned in, elbows on the table, jaw clenched like he'd been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Low IQ radicals like Crockett are destroying America. No one moved, not the moderator, not the camera operators, not the 50 to million people watching from their living rooms. It wasn't just the words, it was the venom. The way he spit her name out like a slur. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation, it was disbelief. A breathless half-second passed, then gasps, then murmurs. Then that humming, barely audible current that runs through a room right before it catches fire. Jasmine didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't smile. She stared at him like she'd stared down every smug principal, every condescending professor, every man who ever assumed her mouth was decoration. She stood. Anti-IQ predators like you, she said, her voice clear as cracked glass, are bankrupting America's soul, one cruel, calculated policy at a time. Trump chuckled under his breath, but the smirk didn't stick. Jasmine stepped forward. IQ. You want to talk about IQ? I passed the Texas bar while holding down 3 jobs. I earned 2 degrees without buying a building. I've written laws while you were writing tweets about fast food. Don't you dare measure my intelligence using the same ruler you used to bankrupt casinos. The audience stirred. A woman in the third row whispered, "She's not done." And she wasn't. You think brilliance is volume, you think domination is strategy. But let me tell you what you're really afraid of. A black woman who doesn't flinch, who doesn't smile when she's insulted, who doesn't fold when the heat's turned up. Trump exhaled through his nose, tapping his fingers like he wanted the moment to end, but it wouldn't. Jasmine leaned into the mic like it was a courtroom closing argument. "You call me low IQ. Let me tell you what low IQ looks like. It looks like cutting school lunches to save tax breaks for oil companies. It looks like defunding literacy programs in counties where half the children can't spell their own names yet. It looks like turning your own voters into scapegoats and calling it patriotism." She took out a single sheet of paper, another letter, this one from a 12-year-old in rural Arkansas who wrote that without her after-school program, the only place open after 3 p.m. is Dollar General or my uncle's garage with drugs. Jasmine held the letter high. This child doesn't need your IQ test. She needs a classroom that doesn't leak, a teacher who isn't stretched across for grades, and a president who doesn't see her zip code as a write-off. The room pulsed with tension. Trump opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. He lit the match. Jasmine had already set the fire. "You want to call me low IQ?" she said, her voice now calm but seismic. "Then let the nation decide which mind builds a better future, yours or mine." And if that insult was meant to silence her, why does the whole country suddenly want to hear what she says next? It started with a single clap. Somewhere in the third row, a woman stood. Not young, not dressed for cameras, just someone who had been silent too long. Her hands came together once, then again, then faster. By the fourth beat, she wasn't alone. Others joined, then a row, then a section. And then the whole room detonated in a roar of applause. Jasmine Crockett hadn't moved. She stood at center stage like a statue carved in defiance, her eyes locked on Trump, who now sat back in his chair, blinking like he couldn't remember where he was. For the first time that night, the silence belonged to him. Cameras panned wildly. A CNN anchor whispered off mic, "This just shifted the entire race." Phones lit up like fireworks in the hands of the audience. Hashtags surged across the screen in real time. Hashtag Crockett-Trump. Hashtag low IQ my ass. Hashtag she brought receipts. And then, the tweet that would break the internet. At Realer Crockett, "If defending poor kids from cruelty makes me low IQ, I'll wear it like a crown." Hashtag Crockett-Trump. Within minutes, it had 4.6 million views. Producers backstage were yelling into headsets. The moderator had gone silent. Even Fox News, broadcasting on delay, decided not to cut. Because America wasn't just watching, they were choosing. And they weren't choosing the man who barked. They were choosing the woman who bled truth like a blade. Trump looked stunned. He reached for a bottle of water and missed the cap twice. Then, with a tight smile, he muttered into his mic, "All theater. Just knows, none of it matters." Jasmine turned her gaze toward him. No anger, no mockery, just the precision was surgeon before the final cut. "Funny how you call it nose when you're not the one speaking." The crowd roared again. She stepped forward, not toward Trump, but toward the people. "Tonight wasn't supposed to go like this. I was supposed to sit here, smile politely, and let a man who's never taught a class lecture the country on education. I was supposed to nod while he insulted every kid too poor to matter in his tax plan. I was supposed to accept that this room, this system, this platform, was never built for people like me." She paused, the room breathless, but maybe the stage wasn't neutral. Because the truth never needed permission to show up. Gasps. The moderator glanced nervously at the control room, but Jasmine wasn't done. "This isn't a soundbite war anymore. It's a line in the sand. And if you think calling me names will stop me, then you've mistaken volume for strength. I've lived too long in silence to be afraid of microphones now." The crowd rose again, this time, not clapping, but standing, thunderous, unify, electrify. Trump shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly calculating the optics. But there was no winning this beat, not anymore. Jasmine stepped back to her chair, calm now, composed, but the room was still burning from her fire. Because when truth finally collides with a camera lens, what happens next isn't debate, it's reckoning. The cheers hadn't even settled when Jasmine placed the red folder back on the table. But this time, she didn't let it sit like a warning. She stood, held it in one hand, and turned it upright so every camera in the room could lock onto the gold seal at the corner. DOJ Internal Analysis, unredacted. The audience sucked in a collective breath, even the moderator stiffened, glancing toward the producers like a man watching the edge of a cliff grow closer. Trump's face changed, from insulted, to irritated, to panicked and then to rage. He slammed his palm on the table. That's classified. You're leaking classified trash. Jasmine didn't flinch. She tilted her head, just slightly, the smirk curling at the edge of her lips like a match about to light. You should read it. It's about your school lunch counts and your golf resort profits. The room imploded audibly. Journalists dropped pens. Phones flew up. Someone in the audience gasped so loudly it echoed. Trump's face flushed to a color not even his makeup could mask. That's a lie. I never. Jasmine cut him off like a scalpel. Never what? Never funneled funds from USDA contract rollbacks into a shell corporation that owns your Florida resorts catering division. Never had your son's name pop up on internal memos linking hospitality tax credits to educational grant sweeps. Because I have your signature on 3 of those emails, sir. All time-stamped, all authenticated. Trump turned to his offstage. This is illegal. Stop this. Cut her mic. Jasmine leaned in, voice suddenly low, intimate, laced with fire. The only thing that needs to be cut is your ability to bury the truth under lawsuits and scare tactics. The moderator opened his mouth, but Jasmine raised her hand not in defiance, but in proof. She flipped the folder open slowly, revealing just the first page. Cameras zoomed, the header read, Preliminary Impact Assessment, Education Budget Redirection, Internal Corruption Risk Memo. Beneath it, 5 names, 3 were Trump-appointed officials. 1 was a lobbyist. The 5th, Jared Kushner. The gasp this time was different. It wasn't dramatic. It was dreadful. Trump stumbled over his words. That's not that's fake. You're planting documents now. Jasmine stared at him like she was looking through a glass coffin. You don't get to cut food from children and then feed yourself off the scraps. Not in my America. A woman in the audience cried out, read it all. A chant began, read it, louder, stronger, real. Trump stood now, both hands clenched into fists. You're going to regret this. I'll see you into silence. Jasmine looked at him, no fear, no rage, just the calm of someone who knew the house was already on fire and was simply naming the match. You've been sewing silence into people your whole life. But tonight, the cameras are still rolling. And if the first page cracked the door, what happens when she turns to page 2? Live. She didn't wait for permission. Jasmine Crockett turned the page. A second sheet slid free from the folder, this one thicker, weightier, not in paper, but in consequence. She held it up, then laid it gently on the desk like it contained bones. This page isn't about politicians, it's about children. Real names, real lives, real silence. She tapped the page 3 times, once for each column. Name, age, program lost. The screen behind her flickered, and then it began. Photos filled the air above them, small faces, first graders, 7th graders, kindergartners, eyes wide, some smiling, some serious. A voiceover Jasmine had pre-recorded began to play, low, heavy, undeniable. Amira Jackson, age 9, Memphis, Tennessee. Lost her literacy tutor after the tidal eye freeze. Rafael Ortiz, age 7, Austin, Texas, cut from the autism support group after school. His mother said he stopped speaking for 3 weeks. Liam Grant, age 6, West Virginia, denied early intervention services. Speech delay now considered severe. Jasmine's voice cracked, but only once. She pointed at the screen as faces kept appearing, one by one. These are not made-up stories. These are your cuts, Mr. Trump. This is your budget, in human form. Trump shifted, uncomfortably, waving at the moderator, visibly agitated. Enough. This is manipulative garbage. She's weaponizing kids to score points. Jasmine spun on him so fast the moderator flinched. Say their names, Trump. Look into this camera, into every living room, and tell their parents why your spreadsheet mattered more than their futures. She turned back to the crowd. These children lost more than services. They lost momentum, confidence, words. Some of them lost speech literally because the support that kept them growing vanished overnight like they didn't matter. A still came up one image, full screen. A beau with headphones, a tear on his cheek, holding a crayon drawing of a speech bubble that read, "Help me talk." Jasmine's voice dropped. That's Elijah, 6 years old. Diagnosed on the spectrum. His mom worked 2 jobs. The after-school therapist was the only session he had access to all week. Then your freeze came. No warning, no recourse. His mother found out the program was gone when she showed up and the door was locked. Trump said nothing. The cameras stayed on him. America watched a billionaire, red-faced and seething, while a congresswoman named names. You always talk about real Americans, Jasmine growled. Well, here they are, and they're drowning in the very system you starved. But you won't look, you won't even say their names, because to you they're not people, they're costs. And the only thing you invest in is applause. The room was frozen. No one coughed. No one moved. She picked up the folder again. We talk about justice in abstract terms. We talk about policy like math, but policy has a face. And justice starts when the protected are forced to look at the ignored. Her hands were steady now, and if you won't say their names, Mr. Trump, I'll read every damn one of them. So if one folder can hold this much truth, how many more have we been taught not to open? It happened in the breath between names. Jasmine had just finished reading the 12th child on the list, Mario Douglas, 10, denied access to her reading specialist in rural Arkansas. Her voice had softened, but her presence had never been sharper. The studio was dead silent. Not reverent, terrifying, like the entire set was teetering over a fault line, waiting for one tremor to send the whole thing collapsing. Then it came. Get that bitch off the air before she buries us. It wasn't private. His mic was still live. And the entire country heard it. The room froze. You could hear the cables buzzing in the rafters, the camera lenses recalibrating, the collective gasp of a nation being punched in the mouth. CNN producers scrambled, MSNBC, and wide-eyed. Even Fox News delayed its 7-second broadcast buffer, unsure if what had just spilled into America's living rooms was real. Trump's eyes widened half a beat too late. He looked at the red light on his mic. It was glowing. Crockett didn't speak. Not yet. She didn't need to. Because the audience exploded first, a rising wave of "oh my God. Did he just," he said what, rippled across the studio. Viewers at home flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram with clips that went viral in under 90 seconds. Hashtag Mitchett and hashtag he called her that climbed to trending instantly. Trump tried to talk over the storm. That wasn't "I didn't mean that's out of context, this is raped." But the damage had already been done. And Jasmine. She simply stepped forward, letting the chaos crash around her like a storm breaking against stone. "Thank you," she said quietly into her mic, "for finally telling the truth, not about me, but about you." "Me? But about you." The crowd simmered, then snapped into a standing ovation that shattered the studio's soundboard levels. Security looked nervous, staff panicked, but Jasmine remained still. "You didn't call me a congresswoman, you didn't call me a mother. You didn't call me a representative of millions of Americans who trusted me to be their voice tonight." She stared directly at him now, no fury, just something colder, truth with teeth. "You called me what men like you have always called women like me. We stopped being quiet, a threat." Trump opened his mouth. Jasmine raised her hand. "You built an empire out of shouting down truth. Tonight, the mic turned back on. And now the world gets to hear who you are in filter." The control room whispered frantically, "Do we cut? Do we break to commercial?" But no one moved. No one dared interrupt this moment. Jasmine looked to the cameras, to the millions watching, and her voice dropped one final octave. "You called me a bitch, but let me remind you, every revolution starts with a woman they tried to silence. So the only question left now is, will she make him regret it, where the whole world can see?" She didn't ask permission, she didn't build suspense. She simply reached down, unlatched the red folder, and peeled it open live, on national television. The sound of paper shifting echoed through the studio like a thunderclap in a church. Cameras zoomed, phones in the audience rose like a sea of glowing orbs. Backstage, producers swore under their breath. No one had cleared this, no one had planned for it. But every single person in the room knew the moment was historic before the first stage was even turned. Jasmine Crockett held up the first sheet. The Department of Justice watermark shimmered faintly under the lights. No redactions, no black bars, just the truth. "What you're looking at," she said, voice controlled, deliberate, almost surgical, "is an internal budget projection analysis conducted by Trump's own transition team, buried, hidden, sealed under legal privilege. Until now." She turned the document around. A full-screen graphic popped up behind her. It wasn't flashy, it was cold, clinical. Projected literacy drop red states, plus 43%. The audience gasped. Someone shouted, "Jesus Christ!" A man in the back dropped his phone. Crockett continued, her words slicing through the silence. "According to this analysis completed and signed off by Trump's fiscal advisory group, states most reliant on federal education dollars would see a projected literacy drop of 43% within 2 school years if the proposed cuts went through. Those states are overwhelmingly rural, overwhelmingly red, overwhelmingly forgotten." She flipped to the next page. "This chart estimates that 1.3 million students will lose access to intervention programs. Another 900,000 will be removed from early reading development tracks. These aren't estimates pulled from partisan think tanks. These are internal numbers, your numbers." Trump leaned forward, jaw clenched. "This is fake. None of that is mine. I never saw that report. She's making it up." But the signature at the bottom said otherwise. Jasmine zoomed in. Donald J. Trump. Initialed. DJT. The room broke open like glass under pressure. Jasmine turned slowly, facing the crowd, her voice sharpening like a courtroom closing argument. You knew the harm, you saw the numbers. And instead of stopping it, you buried it beneath non-disclosure agreements and NDAs. You pulled the country, you were saving money, while secretly preparing to gut its future, and you did it with full awareness that your own base would be the first to bleed. Trump barked back, "You don't even know what those charts mean. You're twisting everything. Those aren't final drafts." She turned to him with fire in her eyes. "A draft doesn't unstarve a child. A draft doesn't reverse a second-grade illiteracy rate. A draft signed by your initials is still a blueprint for destruction." The lights above seemed to dim as she held the folder higher, letting every camera capture it. "This isn't politics, it's premeditation." And in that instant, every viewer, every mother, every teacher, every student watching understood one thing. He didn't just gamble with budgets, he calculated the fallout. So what happens when the country sees not just what he's done but that he knew all along? Trump stood, chair screeched back, face crimson. Fist clenched so tight the mic on his lapel trembled from the feedback. "Which? Traitor." The words didn't echo, they detonated. Studio lights flickered. A producer backstage dropped his headset. The moderator paled. Somewhere in the front row, a woman covered her mouth in horror, and a man muttered under his breath, "He just lost it." Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink, didn't flinch. She tilted her head, calm as a guillotine before the fall. "And you're a coward," she said, slow and savage, hiding behind tax cuts and Twitter lies. He pointed at her, fingers shaking. "You're done. You're gonna get sued, indicted, deported. I don't care what office you hold. You crossed a line." She smiled, cold, deadly. The kind of smile that doesn't entertain threats. The kind that remembers every eviction, every insult, every door slammed in her mother's face. "And you crossed every classroom in America like a bulldozer, flattening futures so you could build golf courses." The crowd erupted, half standing, half stunned. The moderator, desperate, leaned into his earpiece. "Control, cut to commercial, cut now, we need to pull." Too late. The feed was still live, and Twitter was already flooding with clips. Hashtag the scream, hashtag red folder reckoning, and hashtag traitor to children all trended globally within minutes. A CNN reporter tweeted, "No spin left. No script, just history burning in real time." Backstage, producers tried flipping the switch to black screen, but a new problem emerged. The control board refused to respond. The technical director turned pale. "We're still hot across all platforms." The moderator raised a shaking hand to interrupt, but the audience shouted back, "Let her speak." And so she did. "You call me a traitor. You betrayed the children who trusted your name on a ballot. You betrayed the veterans whose kids now eat dinner in the dark. You betrayed your own base the second you decided literacy was a luxury. Trump's hands trembled now not with fury, but fear. He looked around like the walls were closing in. He reached for water, missed the cap, his mouth moved, but nothing came out. Jasmine stepped forward, closer than she'd ever been. Not to intimidate but to reveal, you've called me every name in your book. But none of them will erase the facts printed in this folder, none of them will unsign your initials. None of them will silence the families who finally heard the truth tonight. He tried to retort, he really did, but every word he reached for drowned under the nose of a crowd no longer on his side. A mother in the audience stood up, clutching a photo of her child. She's not the traitor, you are. The moderator looked helplessly into the camera. We apologize for the loss of control over the broadcast, but the crowd cut him off, and Jasmine turned, slowly, to face the American people through the lens. This is what it looks like when lies run out of places to hide. So if he screams like this over one folder, what happens when she opens the rest? Smoke hadn't filled the room, but it felt like it had. The tension hung thick, pulsing, electric like thunder pressing down on drywall. Trump had screamed. The folder had been opened. The audience was on its feet, but Jasmine. She hadn't moved in nearly a minute. Then she did. One step forward. Not fast, not theatrical, but surgical. She took the mic in both hands not because she needed to, but because she was about to do what no president, no press secretary, no partisan echo chamber had ever done. Deliver an indictment in full view of the nation without reading from a teleprompter. Let's be clear, she began, voice slow but sharper than any courtroom gavel. This moment, it's not about me, it's about every child you tried to delete from the budget. Every student you labeled inefficient, every zip code you deemed unworthy of literacy. Trump rolled his eyes, still standing, still fuming. There she goes again, talking like she's some genius from Harvard. You people act smart but make this country dumber. The crowd winced. Jasmine didn't blink. She tilted her head slightly, voice now glass smooth, volcanic beneath the surface. Did you just call me low IQ again? Because if you did, then let me answer you with something your golden elevator never taught you. She opened the folder again, one final page. On it, a breakdown of grant terminations cross-referenced by racial and socioeconomic demographics. She raised the sheet like a verdict. These numbers aren't liberal, they're lethal. 72% of the students affected were from low-income households. 84% were students of color. This isn't a policy failure. This is educational redlining dressed up in spreadsheet. Trump tried to interrupt. Oh please. Everything with you is race, race, race. She cut him off with a whisper. Everything with me is truth, gasps again. Not from the crowd, from staff, from moderators. From Americans realizing they weren't just watching a broadcast, they were watching history dig its fingernails into the floorboards of power. I've had to fight for every inch of ground in this country. You inherited towers, I inherited eviction notices and broken chalk. But don't confuse survival with weakness, don't confuse silence with stupidity. And don't confuse your wealth with wisdom. A pause. She looked at him like she was already reading tomorrow's headlines. You built a brand on being loud. I built a life on being right. And I will not let a man who bankrupts casinos lecture me on intelligence while bankrupting children's futures in the fine print. A roar rose from the audience. Some cry, some shouted. None sat. Jasmine turned, scanning the room like she was measuring the weight of every eye, every camera, every household that had just watched their president melt. She walked back to the mic one last time. You can call me whatever name you want. Just make sure when history writes yours down, they spell fraud correctly. So tell me, America, did he just insult her IQ, or confirm his own bankruptcy of soul? By sunrise, the country was already on fire. Every major town hall from Des Moines to Tallahassee was flooded. Not with protesters, not with politicians, with parents. Fathers holding crayon drawings, mothers with grant termination letters. Teachers clutching photos of students who hadn't returned to school since the cuts. Outside the Capitol, the marble steps turned into a pulpit. One woman sobbed on CNN, holding her child's empty backpack. We packed it every morning for 5 years. Now it just sits there, because his reading class is gone. Because the program vanished. Because the president called kids like mine expendable, the reporter cried too. Across airwaves and timelines, the flood burst. ABC ran it as a special, The Red Folder, What Crockett Unsealed. MSNBC titled the moment, The Scream That Shook the Chamber. Even Fox hesitated, softened their headline, Trump under fire for witch outburst as DOJ docs surface. But the real shift came from where no one expected. Inside the Republican ranks, Senator Tuberville issued a vague but trembling statement. If the documents are authentic, the American people deserve answers. Senator Cassidy was more direct. I've served under 3 administrations. I've never seen education weaponized like this. Then came the thunderclap. Senator Hawley, I supported the budget cuts because I trusted the numbers. If those projections were falsified, if what Representative Crockett showed is real, we've been complicit in the slow destruction of public education. Trump's allies were scrambling. His legal team went dark. His social accounts fell eerily silent. For the first time, the avalanche was falling up the hill toward Mar-a-Lago. Then, just when it felt like the nation had seen every twist, it happened. A video feed blinked onto every major network during an afternoon press conference. It was Jasmine Crockett's father. An old clip, recorded years before. Simple, framed in the kitchen of a small Texas home. The man sat in a faded work shirt, his hands rough from a life of labor, his voice calm but dangerous in its certainty. I told my daughter never to pick fights. But if a liar stands between you and the truth, you don't go around him, you don't wait for someone else. You take him down, clean, clear, and loud enough for the country to hear. The clip ended, no music, no spin, just a father's legacy made flesh. Jasmine hadn't asked for the video to be aired, but America needed it, because what she did that night, what she unleashed with that red folder, that name-by-name litany of betrayed children, that refusal to kneel under slurs or threats, wasn't politics. It was bloodline. It was inherited courage. And now, the question wasn't whether she'd gone too far. The question was whether anyone else would dare go further. So now that the world has heard the lie, and seen the folder, and felt the fire, who's still brave enough to defend what he did? By Wednesday morning, the numbers hit harder than any insult ever could. A bombshell report dropped by the Brookings Institute, followed by confirmation from the U.S. Department of Labor, painted a picture more damning than even Jasmine's folder. The statistics weren't political, they were punishment wearing a suit. In the 46 counties where federal education grants had been slashed or frozen, unemployment had spiked by an average of 6.8% in just 4 months, not because factories closed, not because supply chains collapsed, because schools did. Custodians laid off, bus routes canceled, cafeteria workers furloughed, after-school tutors gone, early intervention staff erased, and in rural counties where the school was the only stable employer, entire neighborhoods were bleeding jobs because children were denied futures. It wasn't an accident, it was arithmetic. Jasmine stood on the steps of Capitol Hill, folder in one hand, a stack of spreadsheets in the other. No podium, no prepared remarks, just truth and filter, unleashed, and live. This isn't some distant statistic. This is the heartbeat of small-town America flatlining in real time. She held up a chart. Counties in Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, deep red on every electoral map, now turned red with job losses. This isn't the blue coasts collapsing, this is your base, Mr. Trump, and they're the ones you cut first. Reporters leaned in, breathless, cameramen tightened in their frames. Even network anchors stopped talking mid-sentence. Jasmine wasn't making a speech, she was delivering a verdict. The school closes, the jobs leave, the grocery store shrinks hours. The gas station lays off clerks, and then what? You stand at a rally and blame immigration. She stepped closer to the press line, eyes burning like the fuse of something built to detonate. You called it reform, you called it efficiency. I call it the Trump drain. The moment you pulled the rug out from under children, you dragged working-class families down with it and then had the audacity to sell them bootstraps while they were drowning. The cameras capture every word. The silence that followed wasn't absence, it was awe. A new screen popped up behind her, this one tracking literacy rates, dropout spikes, and suicide hotline volume in the counties affected. A red arrow climbed through each chart like a scar. You didn't just defund schools, she snarled. You defunded futures. You turned education into collateral damage for your campaign slogans. Someone in the press pool whispered, "She's rewriting the narrative in real time." But Jasmine didn't care about narrative, she cared about proof. She tapped one final line on the page, an internal email from a Trump aide discussing how education restructuring could free up assets for infrastructure projects in swing states. They weren't budgeting, they were bargaining. With your children, with your teachers, with your towns. She looked straight into the camera, steady, steel-eyed. And if numbers like this don't make you furious, maybe it's because you were never the one they planned to erase. So now that the data's screaming louder than the headlines, who's still pretending not to hear it? She didn't raise her voice, she didn't have to. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped forward for her final statement, the room had already surrendered. The senators had gone silent, the crowd no longer brat. Trump sat rigid, jaw locked, eyes darting between the red folder and the cameras as if either could offer an escape. They couldn't. She placed the open folder on the desk in front of her, pages still rustling like they were alive, like the names inside were trying to speak for themselves. She held the mic gently, almost like a prayer, but her eyes were surgical, unforgiving, final. This hearing was never about partisanship. It was never about left versus right. It was about right versus wrong. And for once, America saw the difference in real time. She turned toward the panel of lawmakers who had sat in silence for most of the broadcast, too stunned or too afraid to move. Some now looked down, some tried to hide behind tablets. One openly wiped his eyes. Every excuse has been burned. Every lie reduced to a paper trail. Every ounce of cruelty unmasked, not by opinion, not by bias, but by data and by children's names you never even tried to remember. She let that linger in the air just long enough to make it permanent. "You can't lead a nation," she said slowly, each word a stone thrown through glass, "if you hate its children." The crowd erupted, not a cheer or roar, deafening, cathartic, historic. It shook the studio floor. A chant surge from the backhand flooded the room. "Say their names, say their names." Some cried, some screamed. Others just stood there, stunned by the weight of what had unfolded over the last 90 minutes. The hearing was no longer a hearing. It had become a reckoning. One folder, one voice, and a nation realizing it had been sleepwalking off a cliff. Crockett didn't step back. She raised the red folder one last time, now slightly bent from the heat of the moment, and held it above her head. "What you've seen today is only the beginning. You think this folder is a threat? You should be terrified. It's not the only one." Trump tried to speak, but only managed to broken syllables if were fading into irrelevance. Jasmine stared into the camera, not as a politician, not even as a congresswoman, as a daughter, as a fighter. As someone who had once been one of the children erased by the system she just dragged into the light. Because what comes next isn't a soundbite, it's accountability. The screen faded to black just as her last sentence landed, undeniable, inescapable. And if this folder shook the room, just imagine what's still sealed. So now the question isn't whether she opened the red folder, it's whether America is ready for what's inside the next one. The nation was no longer watching, it was listening. Jasmine Crockett stood beneath the stark, quiet lighting of the congressional hall like a figure carved out of defiance and fire. Her voice didn't shake, her posture didn't soften, and her eyes didn't flinch, not when the camera zoomed in, not when her earpiece crackled with warnings, not even when Trump's legal team stormed out 5 minutes earlier. She held up the crimson folder, no longer just a symbol, now a wound-turned weapon. "They drew red lines," she began, voice low but steady. "I drew truth. They erased our programs," she continued, eyes fixed forward, "so we rewrote the map." And then she paused, not for drama, for weight. "They tried to shrink the future into the size of their wallets. But we expanded it with facts, with fury, and with names they wanted us to forget." A beat. This wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't bought, it was earned. She placed the folder on the podium like a gavel. "History won't ask how loud we were. It'll ask when we stopped whispering." Blackout. The chamber had emptied, but the cameras were still rolling. Not for the networks, not for the headlines, but for something heavier. Jasmine Crockett stood alone at the podium, backlit by the dimming lights of the Capitol. Her hand rested on the red folder, now tattered at the edges, opened, weaponized, unforgettable. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, She looked straight into the lens. Not like a politician, not like a victor, but like a mother, a daughter. A citizen who had watched many futures vanish behind statistics and sealed budgets. Her eyes shimmered not from fear, but from clarity. Then her voice, soft but searing, broke the silence. They called it policy, but it was punishment. They called it budget cuts, but it was childhood theft. They said some kids weren't worth investing in. But that lie doesn't survive tonight. She leaned forward, every word now scalpel. If your child's future was on the line, would you stay silent? A long pause, no music, no applause. Just the hum of America breathing in that question. Then, before the screen faded to black, one final, whispered blow. Because silence is how they win. And you just watched what happens when we don't. Cut to black. This story isn't just about politics, it's about power, silence, and the courage to speak when it's hardest. Jasmine didn't just fight for policies, she fought for the invisible, the forgotten, the silenced. In a world where truth is often buried beneath power, one voice clear, unwavering can still redraw the map. You don't need a podium to make change, you just need a moment of courage. Ask yourself, what's the one truth you've stayed silent about? And what would happen if you finally spoke it out loud? Comment below, what future are you willing to fight for? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.